This is a demonstration of how to make a tea bowl for the Japanese tea ceremony on the wheel. Now that's a huge subject, and there are so many different kinds of tea bowls. I'm going to show you three, keeping in mind that our current assignment of making a black Raku tea bowl is based on the idea that you're going to hand build that tea bowl. But I thought for those of you who do have a wheel or do know how to throw on a wheel, you might enjoy, even if you don't have a wheel, you might enjoy seeing how they're made on the wheel. And what's interesting, this is one style I will show you. This is a what you might call a cylindrical style. And you can see it's got a kind of a really kind of freewheeling asymmetry to it, a lot of surface, interesting surface. And you can see the same thing. There's that characteristic carving of the foot that is so expressive and spontaneous and spontaneous. Really, it's spontaneous, but it's also informed by a lot of experience, continuity of experience. So here is this example of tea bowl. So I'll demonstrate a few of these that you can see thrown on the wheel. But what's interesting about these is that this form, when thrown on the wheel, is mimicking hand building. If you look at Raku tea bowls that are made traditionally by hand, these are an effort to mimic those forms. So even in throwing them, we're trying to get the asymmetrical qualities that come from hand building. The other type of bowl that I will demonstrate for you is an open, kind of a more open, sort of almost a funnel shaped tea bowl that you can see here. And again, quite an expressive foot that is in there. Now, in this video, I will just throw the forms, and then we'll have to wait for the trimming. The trimming will come later because it needs to stiffen up a little bit. So for now, let me get us oriented here. The camera goes off of me and the dog and down to the wheel head. And so I will show you these two forms and probably a third form as well, which I refer to more as Oribe. So for these cylindrical forms, like the black tea bowl I showed you, I use about 2 pounds of clay. So we'll get started with that. And I'll make a few of these and talk you through the ideas that I'm forming, how I'm thinking as I work with them. Initially, the wheel is spinning quite quickly, and this clay is a little bit stiff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of wheel wedge it a little bit, bring it up and down a few times, just to soften it a little bit. Though this clay, being stiff, the great thing about stiff clay is that though it might be initially difficult to center, once it's centered, it's super stable to throw. So there's advantages. So what we see here is I'm centering it, and I want to keep an eye on the width here. I want to center it out to the footprint that I want the bowl to be. And I want it to be this footprint here. I want it to be this width that you see in the bowl from here, from this side here over to this side. So all of this will be trimmed away. But in order to get these sides and to put the stress on them that you'll see me put on them, there has to be complete support underneath. So that's why we need 2 pounds of clay. And now I'll open it up. And still we're moving quite fast, and everything is very symmetrical. Initially, everything starts out very symmetrical. So you can see that I've opened it up, and I want to give myself enough at the very bottom so that I can trim in a little bit for the foot. And so the bottom is a slow rising. It's a slow rising quality there. So you can see it's a gentle, gentle curve. Can you see that? It's a very gentle curve. So it starts in the middle and it's a curve. And the reason that it's a gentle curve like that is that when you mix tea, you do it with a bamboo whisk that has a kind of curved shape that'll fit very nicely in that curve there. So there we go. We're gonna, now what we do here, a couple things here. One is you want what's called a udamari, or no, I'm sorry, it's called a chamari here. This little, you want a little dimple in the center, and that's where the tea is going to rest after you drink tea. A little bit will settle in this chamari, which is a pool of tea. That's what that means. And here, I'm going to start pulling the sides up. And I want to get so you can see I changed the direction quite dramatically here. And now you can see that the sides of the bowl are coming up. And all of this still very symmetrical. I want to come, as I'm doing this, I want to make sure that I maintain that gentle curve for the bamboo whisk. And I want to get, I want the walls to be thin enough so that it's not too heavy as a bowl. And I always go back and re-emphasize the thickness of, I re-emphasize that gentle soft curve. It's not a big, it's just a little bit of a dish, not much. And now this is really important. Speed is everything at this point. So what you'll see is I'm kind of going to start extruding the clay. Notice how slow the wheel is going, and I'm extruding the clay through my fingers. And then I'll come up here and I'm going to just pull the lip here, and that will give me a sort of undulating, kind of almost like a landscape look to the piece. And it's also giving me kind of a little bit of a natural asymmetry there. You just bring it in a little bit, push against a rib, just a touch, to give it a feeling of structure, perhaps a little stiffness. Everything about this now, for me, is qualitative. It's very similar to my experiences of sculpting a figure or something. I'm very sensitive to the appearance of the form, what the form is like. And think of it almost as lungs, meaning that there's a kind of pushing outward when you're inhaling, and how the lungs expand, and then an exhaling and a compression, and then it's sort of an interplay between pushing out and compressing inward. And when I get something that I'm happy with, then I'll just trim off a little of this excess to get what will eventually be the trimming of the pot. And I want to make sure that I haven't lifted the edge too much in here. And that's really the beginning of a tea bowl. Now, for a tea bowl to succeed, and I think I have this quote in your classes, but there's really so much that needs to come together. There is the form itself, which we've pretty much established, and you want that to be good. But then I'm going to have to trim, and you'll see from the trimming demonstration that trimming is that when you're cutting a foot, it's really it's very assertive, and you can really get a great foot, or you can end up tanking the whole thing. So let's suppose, and you can see here, I'm going to just compress it a little bit. You can see the lip is pretty soft. I'm just going to compress it in here. And that's maybe, I may not want that much of a kind of a shape of that. So I can just come back here and form it how I want it to make a finished tea bowl. And there you go. That's a good example there. I like the way that one looks. So, you didn't see that, but what I did is I finished by, I guess I can do that next time. I'll bring it down and you can see it. So let's do another one of those. I'll talk you through that again. So I'm going to start again by moving the clay around pretty assertively. And this is again called wheel wedging. And what I'm doing is I'm kind of loosening up the clay. I'm freeing the molecules, making things a little bit more pliable and fluid. Now I'm going to center the clay down to the right scale for the bowl, and I'll start opening it up. And you want to leave enough clay there so you can cut out a foot. You want to leave enough clay for the foot. And again, I'm thinking of a very slight slope here, just a very gentle slope upward. And what I find for the chamari, for this little dimple in the middle, that the natural distance between my middle finger here is a little longer than my pointer finger. So it naturally makes an indent for the chamari if I angle it just right. And then I'm bringing it slowly up and out. And then I'm going to start throwing the clay upward. And so I would say I have a 2-pound ball of clay, but by the time I'm done trimming, I will probably have no more than 1.25 pounds of clay. I'll trim away a lot. So again, you'll notice everything starts out quite symmetrical. And then I'll reach in here, and I really say it's like extruding. I'm not just dragging it. I'm kind of extruding the clay, thinning it out. And you'll notice the wheel has gotten very slow. Asymmetry is only possible with a slow wheel. And I'm squeezing and extruding the clay through my fingers. And so it's a nice looking, I think that looks nicely, that looks good there. Sometimes I have to stop myself because I've got a really nice thing going on. And though I think I might want to go further, I really don't. I need to stop when the form gets there's a place where it really gets nice. And I think that's what's happened here. So again, I will come in here and I'm just going to clean up a little bit of the clay right here. And cut it off. I can lift it up here. And then I can think about holding it. And in thinking about holding it, I'll naturally give it a shape to my hand. There. So there's a second bowl. Now let's try one of this shape here. This is a much gentler shape, you can see. And I don't know, gentler shape doesn't quite describe it, but it's a smaller amount of clay. And the first thing you should know is that when you open it up, you're making a funnel, so you won't open it very shallow and wide like I did on the last one. The other thing you should know is that you need to leave some clay at the bottom. You need a little bit more clay for a foot because the foot is a little bit deeper on this form. So again, I'm starting with a kind of wheel wedging. I'm getting the clay moving in the molecules. I might not do this so much, but this clay is quite stiff. So you can see here, I have a very narrow footprint here, much narrower footprint on this for this form. And then I'm going to open it up. And I'm going to leave quite a bit of, there's about 3/4 of an inch of clay down there. And then I'm going to start throwing the shape. And I'll show you several of these variations of this here. So I'm going to be bringing up the form into a kind of funnel-like shape. And in this case, you don't really think of a chamari so much. The whole thing is a chamari. The whole thing comes down to a little dimple at the bottom. So you don't really need to form something specific that way. So, and then what I find in this form is this is really where that idea of a lung becomes really instructive. When you think about this form, and you can look on the outside here is really a good place to spot this. But you're just going to start thinking about inhaling, how you inhale and your lungs expand to create a shape and a form. So for this first one, I'm not going to go to any great lengths to show you changes in shapes and forms there. I think that's a lovely shape there. I think that's just fine. And so, and the other thing that I find is that I don't use ribs when I'm making tea bowls. I think the mark of the hand, you're actually searching for something more symmetrical. And a rib tends to give you a more manufactured, less hand touch of the hand. We want that hand in the piece. So you can see here, this is just a beautiful symmetrical bowl here that we can use. Now you may wonder, you know, why are the tea bowls so big? You know, if we're making tea, why do we need such a big bowl? And that's a really good question, because as it turns out, when you're serving tea, you're really only using about a quarter of a cup to a third of a cup of water. It's a very small amount that goes in. But the way that the matcha tea, the green tea, is made, prepared, is that the powder, hot water is added to the powder, and then it's vigorously whisked by this bamboo whisk. And that vigorousness is shooting the tea all over the inside. You need that room to move the whisk vigorously to really get a nice infusion of the tea in the water. So that's why the bowls are so large. And there's so much about these bowls that I find fascinating from the point of view of a tea ceremony. The tea ceremony being this invitation to sit quietly, hopefully with dear friends, people you admire, care about, and to enjoy a beautiful cup of tea. And the idea is that you're kind of being invited to become very aware in the present moment, to wake up to the present moment and to the beauty in the present moment. And so that's really interesting, because the tea bowl in the ceremony plays such a pivotal role, because it's in your hand when you're being invited to wake to the beauty of the moment. And so the tea bowl tends to be a talisman, a kind of a carrier, a messenger that brings you the beauty that you can deeply appreciate as you become fully present in your body and present with your fellow tea guests. It's just a marvelously inspirational and beautiful. It's a great experience. And what I love about as an artist is that here I am, this bowl that I'm making, after it gets a chance to dry and I get a chance to trim it, and then maybe it gets into a wood firing somewhere, maybe it survives the wood firing, and eventually it becomes a bowl in someone's hand as they're waking to the beauty of their present moment. It's a tremendous gift. So I didn't really do it. I thought I was going to, it's a little smaller one, some nice shape. I think I was going to show you a more altered funnel shape, and I'll do that next. So this one I think is just about finished as is. And it's just a beautiful, as you work, just to keep your hand moving in that shape. I love the fact in ceramics that you're drawing the piece from the inside. It's always the inside that determines the finished shape of the form. So there's a couple of these. I'm going to show you at least one more because I want to start playing with a few ideas here with this particular form here. So I've shown you a couple of different sizes of symmetrical, and we'll look at this board of bowls in a minute. But let me show you a few other things. Okay. Again, the clay is stiff, so I want to work it up and down a little bit. There we go. So again, I'm just going to open it and leave myself again that 3/4 of an inch for trimming a foot, a little deeper foot. And I'm going to open this one up a little wider, if possible here. Again, and go just a little bit wider. And so I'm going to do a couple of things. One thing that's interesting here is while it's still a little bit thick, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to just do a little bit of that stretching and extruding that we saw in the cylinder form. So you can see that, right? It's got a bit of an undulation at the lip now. And it's got some movement. And then I'm going to throw it like that. I never did that. And I'm going to try to bring it back into its form. And let any inconsistencies, any irregularities, some of it, a lot of it will disappear, but there'll be just a hint of what the clay went through. The memory of the clay will be that, oh, I was kind of tortured a little bit. I was extruded and I became undulating and a little bit asymmetrical. You can see that in this. And that gives it an interesting quality. And the other thing you can see, hopefully, is that I've thrown it so it's a little wider at the bottom. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to follow the line of this wider straight out so that it becomes a kind of line, of a curve outward that comes out. And you'll see why I do that. So this one is a little bit different than the first two of this form that I showed you. And that would be a fine bowl just by itself because there's these gentle irregularities, this soft asymmetry that would be very intriguing, I think. But what I want to go is go a little bit further with it for this next move. And so I'll cut it off. Whoops, got a little bit of something on there. There we go. There we go. And then cut it off. Now watch what happens here. I'm going to lift this up and then very gently, I'm going to give it a little bit of a motion, a little bit of movement. And that gives it, I don't want it to be a symmetrical kind of 3-point. I want it to have a little bit of variation. This does present some challenges in trimming, but they're easily overcome. But you can see now I have a beautifully undulating lip and it's not quite symmetrical. So I think it adds interest. So this is what we've made thus far. I'm going to show you a few more pieces before we end this recording, but here I'll just bring these by. There's the one we just made. There's a small symmetrical funnel, a larger symmetrical funnel, and then 2 of the cylinder shapes there that we've made. And that's what we've done so far. So I'll set these aside. And then I want to demonstrate a more kind of, I don't know if you call this advanced or alternative, but it's a tradition that's, almost 500 years old, and that's the Oribe form of Tebow. And so I'm a big fan of Oribe, both the decoration and the kind of origins of it. It's quite a bit, it has its own kind of unique quality to it. And there's so much range and possibility in Tebow, both historically and contemporary Tebow. I think like if you look at Suzuki Goro, you can see some amazing things happening with Tebow. So again, I'm starting this. This is a more cylindrical form. So I'm starting it with that gentle slope outward. But with Oribe, he was a tea master who studied with Senyo Rikyu in the middle of the 1500s. And his great insight was he figured out a way to make Tebows different, but at the same time adhering to the same principles of aesthetic that Senyo Rikyu had established. And so what it is it's just much more radical in its distortion. And then watch this move here. I'm going to take my finger and really dig in my thumb and undulate there. And so what you get when you're done with this kind of work is a much more aggressive form, a much wilder shape. And that's the start of it. And these are quite enjoyable to make. I don't know how popular. So I think there's people who love them. I certainly think they're quite popular. The traditional Oribe is. And then the last thing you might do is really give it see how I've pushed my hand in there to give it quite a change of shape. So that's the Oribe style. And by Oribe, what Oribe's big insight was is that there are many ways you can go to arrive at the same form, the same beauty, the same aesthetic. In other words, he adheres strongly to the concept of wabi and sabi, but he was radically innovating. Kind of a central philosophy for him was that rules were made to be broken. So if there was a rigid following of a certain way of making, he started trying to find ways that almost look amateurish or crude in their qualities, but he would champion that idea that if you know what the end aesthetic should feel like, then you can get there. And you can get there in many different ways. And that's what he was interested in. He was interested in breaking new ground. And what makes him particularly what I think Western artists have a chance to understand or learn from this is that he broke new ground, but he did it while respecting existing traditions. Contemporary Western art, you need to really destroy the existing traditions. You need to claim that yours is the only way. You get in Western art history, there's so many examples of that. One of my favorites is when Matisse is actually quoted as saying that Rodin knows nothing about sculpture. Rodin knows nothing about sculpture. He has no sense of the arabesque. That's what Matisse said. And of course, Matisse was trying to promote his arabesque sculpture. But I just find that's a very Western thing, whereas Oribe stayed with Rikyu and became a great innovator under the wing of Rikyu. somebody like Brancusi, a fantastic contemporary sculptor, came to see Rodin and study with him, walked from Romania all the way to Paris to study with Rodin. And after 6 months, he left. He said, nothing great grows under the shade of a great tree. So he decided that he needed, as a Western sculptor, he needed to make his own way. And he did brilliantly. He basically invented contemporary sculpture. Let's take a look now. And here we go again, very symmetrical. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to really drag and push. See, the wheel is almost not moving. And then I'm going to do this move where my inside finger is pushing below, my outside thumb is above that, and I'm just dragging that whole shelf of clay around with me. And then finally, I want to get some undulation at the very lip here, so I'm kind of squeezing and working that as well. And so that's where I've gone. And that's the setup. That's creating the start of the form. And then I can take that and shape it once it's off the wheel. And so we'll see that one more time. So here it is again. And let's see if I do it from, I want to do it from this side, but let's see if you can see me do it from here. Do it from above here. See me pushing in. Because it's holding an angle, it's kind of collapsing a bit. But just a big push inward there. And then I want to keep a bit of that roundness there. And that makes a very undulating, unique form for a tea bowl. So what we have seen in this, we started with this shape, because I've got a little clay on it, but we started with this shape, and you saw how I made these cylindrical forms. And I will have a video where I do the trimming, and you can see how that's done. And then we went into a few examples, both symmetrical and then this, how to make these less symmetrical kind of thrown and altered bowl shapes. And then finally, we saw some examples of the form of Oribe, the actual glaze that Oribe, glazing design that Oribe championed. You may be familiar with it. It's some dark green glaze or dark black glaze in a little section, or a big section of that, and then some white area, and then a little dash repeat of the green or the black, and then iron painting in the white area. And that's the Oribe glaze style that he championed. But a lot of the Oribe bowls are just wild in their shape and very free form. So that's what what I've shown you here. And then there'll be a video to follow of the trimming of these and other bowls. Stay safe, make art, and we'll see you again.